Okay, now we know that the bearing in the bearing cap here is the same one used on the bottom of this shaft right here. It was missing and I didn't have any left in my parts motors, so I thought I'd give it a shot. Never really thought to compare them before. And the shaft is nicely centered. It's at the proper height. It has some play, which I can't do now because it's under tension. And it's playing very well. It's on the governor where it should. That gear is meshing on the governor right where it should be. So that little problem has been solved. And now I know. That means that if the ball bearing in this bearing cap fits that shaft, so do the ones in all the Victors. Because Victor uses the exact same cap in all of their motors, same ball bearing, same size. So that way I can always have a supply of those. I don't know why so many of them are missing. You know, people get careless, I guess, or they don't know it's there, and somehow it falls out when they take the motor apart, or maybe when they're cleaning it, and they just miss it. I mean, I would, well, I guess if you're used to working with the Swiss motors or the Heinemann motors of quality, stuff like that, a lot of them don't have that ball bearing. Only the Victrolas do, the Victor motors do, and I guess HMV took that from Victrola also, the idea. I mean, it's a good idea to have one. But if that ball bearing's not there, this shaft is not sitting at the proper height, which means the turntable is not sitting at the proper height, which means your brake could be a problem, because then it could be hitting the bottom of the turntable, or, you know, it could be auto brake or the manual brake. So it's got to be there. You know, parts are installed in these motors for a reason. Doesn't matter if it's a little felt washer here, or a ball bearing there, or some little clip. It's there for a reason, because they didn't spend money to put parts in these machines if they didn't need to be there. But in this case, it's been solved, and we'll spin her up. Look at that. Right about there, I think, is the right speed. People are probably wondering, what's all that red crud he's got all over the gears? That's grease. That is red bearing grease, modern, and it is mixed, thinned out a little bit with STP motor lube. What's in that bottle? Just to make it a bit creamier consistency in colder temperatures. And it is better. I know a lot of people like to use the original Edison formula, which is fine. That's Vaseline and graphite. You know, whatever you use, it doesn't matter. Whatever grease you can find, except for bacon grease, whatever grease you find is still going to be higher quality than anything they had in the 1920s. All right, there's nothing wrong with graphite, but it tends to look dirty when you put it on, which is very hard to tell if the motor actually is dirty then. And the Vaseline dries out quicker than this stuff does. And then you end up back to, you know, a gopped up mess that you have to deal with. And you can buy this stuff at your local auto parts store by the tub. It's like $6. It's not much, enough for a lifetime. Well, not if you're packing springs, and it takes a bit longer. I usually like to use white grease with the springs. Doesn't matter, whatever you think you want to use. On very weak springs, however, I would recommend just using straight STP lube, because thick grease can actually slow those springs down. Thick grease can slow any spring down. That's mostly a cold weather issue. If the cold temperatures, you know, if you're using the machine, say it's 40 degrees right now in this shop, it's about 45. I only just turned on the heat. So even in 45 degree temperatures, you can see this motor's working very nicely. That's because I do thin the grease out with the STP, and I'm not really using anything too heavy. And it also has a brand new spring, that helps too. But whatever you use, fastest way to start an internet food fight is to say, oh, this is the correct grease. There is no correct grease. Whatever you have, go out in your garage. If you have a tub of grease out there and it's not too fibrous and thick, chances are it's going to be fine. This is not an internal combustion engine or a transmission. It's a very simple spring-powered motor for a phonograph. Very simple motor. Doesn't require a whole lot of special chemicals to keep it running. Does, however, require periodic maintenance, and replacing parts as you find them, or replacing missing parts. I'll have to spin this up once it's in the machine 4 or 5 times, let it wind down just to distribute the new grease that I put in the spring, and just get it all nice and smoothed out on the gears, make sure everything's lubed as it should. Only exception to that grease is that you do happen to have one of the Heinemann motors or one of the Swiss motors that use, or a Gerard, that use the fiber gear. The fiber gear will be right there on that spindle shaft. It goes on the governor, interacts with the governor rather. Don't lubricate that with grease. You can start to break down the material that it's constructed from, which is basically resin and sawdust. What you want to do there is maybe some powdered black graphite or just nothing. The whole point of it to start with was that it didn't need lubrication and it would reduce noise. That's all. Here we go. Back together again, and it will be back in the machine shortly. Well, not shortly, but eventually. I have a few other things to do first. Well, I just wanted to show that the mystery of the ball bearing has been solved. I now have a source of those ball bearings, because I had two parts motors bought off eBay, and I used the bearings out of those already, the bearings in the shaft here, already to replace ones I found missing in other motors I was working on. But now, since I do have their parts motors, I can use the bearings out of those. There's still another one from the other side, the other cap that I can use. One thing, if you happen to be stuck with that ball bearing missing, and you don't have a parts motor hanging around, don't just take a bearing out of one of these caps and put it in there and just leave the cap empty. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not correct. It may work temporarily, but it's definitely not something you want to do, and the shaft is not going to be sitting in there on the governor there, sitting in there properly. So they're easy enough to source off of eBay or from, say, one of the internet parts sellers like George Volima. He has them. He is Great Lakes Antique Phonograph. I use him quite a lot for weird stuff that I can't get anywhere else. I'm sure he could supply you with these ball bearings, the caps, and all of that. So you don't have to borrow from other parts of the motor to replace a missing bearing here. And that's it for now. Back to work.